Okay, so I've recharged the coffee cup. For those who are still here, then let's address this question that Ophelia was asked. I'm just going to give you my thoughts on it, right? You might feel totally differently, but I know that some people will want me to address this question, and there's some things that I want to say on this. And the question is, that was asked to Ophelia, are trans women women? Now, Ophelia's answer was, well, I can't really give you... You want a yes or no answer. This was yes or no. Ophelia was asked yes or no. I can't just give you a straight yes or no because it's more nuanced for me than that. It's actually a more complicated question to answer than I can give in a simple answer like that. So that's what Ophelia said, but she's never really elaborated or made it explicit what those specific things are. What I want to do is I want to give my answer, and then I want to explain why I can see that for some other people it would be a more complicated question to answer. Both for some TERFs, which I want to talk about, and I'm not saying Ophelia is a TERF, but both for some TERFs, but then also for some people who have a different outlook on what makes us what we are and what gender is all about. But first off, I need to answer the question. So the question is, Noel, are trans women women? And my answer is yes. Now, I say it's yes, but let's look at a way in which it's not a categorical yes, because it's being done in such a categorical way, and yet words aren't used in a categorical way. So first off, I just want to say about the history of man and woman. And I don't want to go, we don't need to go back as far as the sort of Middle English and Whiffman and Worman and all that lot. But once the word man started to be applied to one particular gender stroke sex, and I'm going to put them together for now, given the context, and woman for another gender stroke sex, I think it was pretty obvious what it was intended to apply, that the word man was supposed to refer to male-bodied individuals, and the word woman was supposed to refer to female-bodied individuals. And I think before we start getting too dogmatic, we have to appreciate that, and to start to understand that words mean what we want them to mean, right? And that we have some control over that. But then if we're going to get so hooked up over words that we demand, no, it has to mean this thing, then we're really misportraying what words are all about, I think. But we give words the definitions that we give for a reason, and we want those words to do work for us. And I don't think that particular definition, to stick to that, that might have been how people perceived it before, but I don't think it's particularly useful. And why? Because I think there is some use in this pulling apart of the ideas of gender and biological sex. I think that's a useful way to differentiate, because it does seem that some people are physiologically male and psychologically female, and some people are physiologically female and psychologically male. Now, it's a little bit more contentious what psychologically male and psychologically female is, and then maybe, they're not quite as distinct as I mean, it's not entirely distinct what biologically male and biologically female is, of course. But I think there's more overlap there, of course. But I hope you take my point there. There are some people that do feel as if they are a woman trapped in a man's body and vice versa. So I think that's important. And how do we really what is the most important thing when we're looking at people and assessing what they are? Well, for me, I think the psychological side is more important than the physical side. If somebody feels like they're a woman but has a man's body, well, I'd rather go on how if they genuinely feel like they're a woman, then to me that supersedes the physical body that they're in, the carcass that they happen to be hosting, because it's the brain that's important to me. It's the personality, it's the person, it's the individual that's in there that's more important. So for me, that reconfiguration of definition which I propose has taken place is important, and I think it's useful, and so I'm happy to go along with that kind of definition. But that's something that needs to be cleared up before we get too dogmatic about insisting what words should mean, because we should never insist what words mean and what they don't mean in that kind of a way. But this whole issue is also very easy for me because it boils down to this biological argument, doesn't it? Which is that, for me, I always felt the same way, and I've always felt the same way about this, which is that the person we are, right? The psychological aspect to us is built up of very, very many different things. Of course, culture and social conditioning is very, very important. The way that we're brought up when we're young, the toy choices that our parents make on our behalf, the expectations that our parents have of us, the expectation that society has of us, the way in which we're labelled, and then the role models that we're given on, those things that we're expected to live up to given those labels are important. The things that our peers expect of us are important, and all these things shape the person that we are. But at the same stage, I don't buy this bullshit that that's all that it is about. And I don't like these people who say, well, yes, obviously biology plays a part as well, but it's just kind of an exercise then in waving it away. And this is the difference, right? That is why it is so easy for me, because I can think, well, yes, biologically, why is it not impossible that somebody could innately feel themselves to be a woman whilst having a male body? It seems entirely possible that could happen. But what about if you don't feel like that, right? What about if that isn't your position? What about if your position, other than a token hand-waving effort, you mandate that biology doesn't play a part, that it's all to do with social conditioning, that effectively the way we bring young boys up is what shapes masculinity and is what shapes them as a person and is what is responsible for all these different things. That the sole reason why most nurses are female and the sole reason why most engineers are male is just the way they've been brought up. Boys were given Lego, girls were given dolls, and then if you were to swap all that round, right, then all women would, and societal expectations, then 90% of engineers would be female and 90% of nurses would be male, and that is the kind of way that some people view it. And if you don't view it that way, right, then you are an asshole, right? You are the lowest of the fucking low, and they're going to hate you for it, and they're going to mock you for it, right? If you suggest that biology could be playing a part in this as well as culture, and these two things are having an additive process, one on top of the other, but then the clock ticks round and it becomes trans o'clock. And trans o'clock, ladies and gentlemen, and non-binary people, fucking hell, I better say that. At trans o'clock, everything changes. It's like a kind of Cinderella moment, right, where the fucking pumpkin becomes the carriage. Because at trans o'clock, all of a sudden, not only are biological arguments accepted, but they are expected. Oh, they're fucking expected. And if you don't accept the biological argument, if you don't accept the trans person who says that, well, yeah, actually, I was born in a male body and I was brought up as a boy, and the more that I resisted it, the more my parents tried to bring me up as a boy and get me to do all those standard boy things, but I never felt like that. I always felt like a girl. I always identified with the feminine and with females, and it was difficult. My entire upbringing was difficult because there was this dissonance, there was this discord with the way that I was being brought up and the way that I felt. Right, and I fought that, and now I'm old enough, I can make the decision, right? So it wasn't society, it wasn't upbringing, it was none of that. There was something innate in me. There was something biological, fundamentally, that had made me the person that I had. And at that point, if you don't accept the biological person, then you're an asshole, right? Then you're going to be mocked, then you're going to be derided, then you're going to be hated. But by Christ, when that clock ticks round again from trans o'clock to midnight, you better make sure, because that's the time when your carriage turns back into a pumpkin, you better make damn sure that you stop making those biological arguments again, because if you keep making those biological arguments in any other context, ladies and gentlemen, relating to gender, then you're an asshole. Right? Now, okay, look, I'm simplifying things a little bit there, right? I'm being a little bit flippant and I'm slightly overplaying it. But it's true. I hope most people agree with me, even the people that don't like me and don't agree with my perspective, that there does seem to be this kind of difference, that when we're talking about these issues relating to trans people, transgendered people, and the biological aspect of it and the nature-nurture thing, it seems as if a different approach is allowed, And then the rest of the time we're expected to think that gender is really just a result of these social pressures and the way we're brought up. And so I can understand, and maybe this is part of what Ophelia's problem is that she looks at this and thinks, well, we're kind of dealing with gender in this particular kind of way, and yet now all of a sudden, when it comes to trans people, if I apply this totally cultural model, then this whole idea that somebody's transgendered is built on smoke. The same arguments that people made. I made a video recently regarding that Rachel, is it Dolezal, who claimed that she feels black. Right, you know, she's kind of, I don't want to use the word transracial because that means something slightly different, but the equivalent of transgendered, but in regard to race, she feels another race. And people said, well, that's ridiculous because there isn't the same basis. You don't biologically feel black or act in a black way. That's ridiculous. It's all culture. So it's a puff of smoke. You need the biological component, which you have with transgender, for it to mean anything. So perhaps for people who always look at these gender issues from a purely cultural perspective, it's a little bit of a head scratcher because it doesn't really mean anything. I propose to be transgendered if there is no innate component, if there's no intuitive way into the way in which the way that you feel, and for an identity for you to have latched onto, for you to be part of. So that's one of the things, and the second is really more exclusively relating to TERFs. And I'm not saying Ophelia Benson's a TERF. I think probably side with PZ Myers on this. It doesn't happen very often. I don't think she's a TERF in actual fact. But it does relate to TERFs. If you're not aware of what a TERF is, it's a trans-exclusionary radical feminist, which is a kind of radical feminist that either doesn't accept that trans women are women or doesn't want trans women to be treated in the same way as cis women, especially with regard to women's spaces and making sure they don't want trans women invading women's spaces, sometimes because it's just a man in a dress as far as they're concerned, okay? So why would they be so much more hot under the collar about that issue than I am, right? What is the differentiator between the TERF and me with regard to that? And what I'm going to propose is that for a lot of TERFs, the difference is that their transphobia stems from the fact that they fucking hate and revile men. And that is the difference between them and me. I don't hate and revile men, so the penalty for me getting it wrong is different than the penalty for them. And when I look at a trans woman, I don't think, oh, this is somebody that used to be part of a group that I hate and revile. Whereas it's very different for some of these TERFs. Now, let me just give you a couple of examples here that are pertinent to YouTube and to Ophelia Benson. The YouTube one, there is somebody called Mancheese, a woman called Mancheese, who makes comments and makes the occasional video on YouTube. Used to be known as Sale Polani. You may recognise some of these names. Before that was known as Diana Boston. I think has maybe had a couple of other names on YouTube. And she is a TERF. She's a transphobe. She doesn't like trans women, or makes comments that very highly critical of them. And Captain Andy, who is kind of like the chitty chitty bang bang child catcher, but he's the kind of transphobe catcher of YouTube. If there's one thing he can't abide, he's like a sniffer, he's like a witch sniffer. There's one thing he tries to sniff out is transphobia. And he sees transphobia around every fucking corner and every little cupboard. And he pointed out to Jenny McDermott that Mancheese was posting on her videos and that she was chumming up to Mancheese, and he says, you do realise that this person is transphobic, this person who you're chumming up to. And he's right, she is. But the thing that I had to point out to Captain Andy is, you realise that you're just seeing the tip of the iceberg here. Why are you pointing out that she shouldn't be talking to Mancheese because she's a transphobe, when the bigger picture is, the thing that she's noted for after year after year after year after year on YouTube is that she's got a hatred and a revulsion of men and maleness and masculinity and all these related but different things. But all these things, these are the things that are the core of a distaste, and that I think there's a link between the two. In actual fact, what I'm proposing, I think her transphobia actually stems from a hatred of men. Now, Captain Andy's response was, well, okay, maybe she does hate men, but surely the transphobia is enough. Surely that's enough to go on. And he's probably right, it is. But it seems kind of strange that when clearly these things are related in some kind of way, that you would just ignore the bigger picture with which relates to as if that's not really important, that's not significant. Then we have the Ophelia Benson one. Now, this I've got to actually side with Ophelia Benson on this, because on M.A. Melby's blog, somebody called H.J. Hornbeck, who is somebody who always thinks they know everything about fucking everything, but gets a great deal wrong, was listing some of the transphobic things or dodgy things that Ophelia Benson had done. And what H.J. Hornbeck said Ophelia Benson had done, has posted a transphobic cartoon strip on her blog. Well, I was actually following Ophelia Benson's blog at the time that it happened, and I've got to say that H.J. Hornbeck is talking out of their fucking arse or lying. I don't know which one it is, but I saw that cartoon. It wasn't a cartoon strip, it was a single cartoon frame, and it involved... It was sort of aimed at men, right? It's cis men, and it was kind of suggesting that cis men are all mansplainers, or they walk into a room and they just expect everybody to listen to them, right? It's like, I'm a man, I'm in the room now, you better listen to what I have to say, because hey, that's what men are like, right? All of them. And so that was the picture, and the cartoon picture showed a room with an open door and this kind of very unimpressive looking man with a balding head and a comb over and a kind of string vest, as I recall, and maybe braces, is there. And it says something like, a man has entered the room at the bottom, or a manly man has entered the room. It wasn't transphobic at all. Had it featured a trans man or a trans woman, then maybe because it was a negative cartoon, you could have said it was transphobic. Had it featured a woman, you could have said it was misogynistic because it had been a negative cartoon about women. But as it was a cisgendered man, there's obviously nothing to report about the cartoon. It was all, well, fine and dandy, right? But what happened was, some of the commenters that was in that thread went and had a look at this artist's other work, which was all featured on a Tumblr site, and I'd love to show you the cartoon, but I can't find it. Ophelia took the picture down, and I cannot for the life of me at the time of recording this find the picture or any of the artist's other work online, so I apologise for that. But if you had a look at that other work, what you will find is that, yes, about 20%, as reported, the commenters went and looked and they said, this artist does a lot of transphobic work. Are you aware of that? Some of the work, this artist must be a TERF. There's transphobic cartoons on their Tumblr page. And yes, if you looked at it, about 20-25% of them you would regard as transphobic. But what about the other 75%? The other 75%, well, I found them misandristic, right? When I looked at them, I thought, this person clearly has issues with men, hates men, reviles men, dislikes men, has real fucking issues with men. I say misandristic. If it had been women, if they had been about women, not men, none of those commenters, two things about those commenters, none of them would have regarded them as anything other than misogynistic. And the second thing is, they would have fucking mentioned it. But the fact that it was men, I've got to say it because it's just fucking true, right? I'm not putting an MRA hat on now. It's just the fucking facts of the matter. Because it was men in the cartoon, they didn't even mention it. It wasn't an issue. The issue was that a few of the cartoons, a few of the things the artist had done was transphobic. And that was the issue. That is an issue. And Ophelia took that on board and said, oh, I hadn't realised that, and took the cartoon down. It's almost as if I've got to say with these commenters, and the same thing goes with Captain Andy and all his mob, it's not as if they condone these things with regard to men. They don't. If you say to them, they say, no, that's bad as well. But it's if it's seen as just a sort of slight eccentricity or a quirk, you know. If you hate women, that's a fucking terrible thing. You're a terrible person. They want nothing to do with you. If you hate trans women or perhaps trans men, you're a fucking terrible person. They want nothing to do with you. But if you hate men, that's just a bit of a quirk. It's just a bit of a little eccentricity of your character. It's not condoned, but you know, what are some people like? They hates men. She hates men. Oh, what's she like, eh? What a card. That's kind of how it always seems to come across. It's not condoned, but it's like, yeah, it's just a bit of fun. Like, you know, it's nothing to take too seriously. But this is the feeling that I get with regard to some TERFs, not just by those two examples, by any stretch of the imagination, but by quite a great number of conversations that I've had and that I've read. It seems to me that a lot of TERFs have real issues. And why wouldn't these people exist, right? We know, we can see them on the internet, you can find them. You can go on YouTube and find men out there that hate women, that have real problems. Even if they say, oh no, I don't hate women, just the things, frame anything, and immediately it's framed in terms of, oh, fucking women, they have... It's immediately framed in a way that you can see that they have issues. That there's immediately a bias in how they perceive every single thing, and that there's a fucking great chip on their shoulder, right? But everybody is susceptible to this. If you're a trans person, you can be susceptible to these chips on your shoulder, and women can be susceptible to these chips on your shoulder. So the idea that misogynists exist, but now misandry, that isn't a thing, right? Misandrists don't really exist. Why? Because women, what, does their shit not stink? Are there no bigoted women out there? Of course they are. And those women that are bigoted, right, are going to be drawn towards the TERF sphere, aren't they? And they hate men. And now you imagine this, right? This is the point. This is where it ties together. You imagine I invite you to a party at my house. And I invite you, I'm talking with I say, this is my next door neighbour, have a chat with him, you know, have a chat with him. And you get talking with him, then somebody else comes and tells you and says, you know, that guy you were talking to there, he's an offending paedophile. That is a guy who has molested children in the past, right? He's had sexual intercourse with children. And you're repulsed by that. And you come and confront me. What the fuck have you started me talking to this guy for? And I say, well, yeah, he did do those things, but you know what? He's recanted all of that. That was like a past him, and he realizes that the horrific nature of those things, and he's tried to make amends ever since. Now you imagine how you're going to feel about that. Maybe you're an open-minded enough person to say, well, actually, okay, people can change. I accept that. And however much revulsion I feel for how that person was, they're a different person now, and I'll give them a chance. But it's a big thing I'm asking, isn't it? It's a difficult position you're in now, because what if you're wrong? What about if they haven't really changed? What about if that aspect of them still remains in there? What about if then now you need a babysitter, right? And that person says, well, I'll look after your children for you. I'll come into your safe space and look after your children for you. A lot rests on whether they've actually changed. So you imagine now, if you truly hate men, right? If you're repulsed, if you revile men, and you've got somebody there who used to be a man. That's bad enough, they used to be a man, but now they're claiming to be a woman. And they're going to come into these women's safe spaces. Can you see how much more rests on that than it does for me? Right? That if it's wrong, it's a really serious thing, because this is somebody that at least they used to revile when they were a man. Maybe they don't revile them now, but so much rests on them being right and not being wrong. Well, that's kind of how I viewed it, and how I imagine that for some TERFs, not all TERFs, fucking hell no, not all TERFs, and not for Ophelia Benson because she's not a TERF, but for some TERFs, maybe that explains kind of where they're coming from. Easy question for me to answer. I accept a biological component, and I don't hate men, and I don't hate women. So if a trans man comes into a men's space, it doesn't really matter, because I wouldn't mind a woman coming into that space either. So it's fucking easy for me, but I can understand why the question is harder for some other people. I don't think I could have given you a fuller answer to that. I hope that you've enjoyed this fucking long video. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.